Now, with all of the evidence for biblical creation, how do we use that in evangelism?
Putting creation evidences to work today on Creation Magazine Live.
Hi, I'm Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Calvin Smith.
Today on Creation Magazine Live, we're talking about evidences and apologetics and how to use those to show people that the Bible is true.
Right.
Now, we often encounter people, as speakers with CMI, people come up to us and say, well, you know, I don't need to know this stuff. I'm a solid Christian. I believe the Bible. I believe God created and have no problem with that. And that's great. I mean, that's where we all want to be.
Right.
To have that solid faith, in a sense, you know, the Bible, God said it, that settles it, type of a thing.
Right. The Bible actually talks about having a childlike faith. Childlike in the sense
Right.
that, you know, when you're young and your parents say, "Hey, I love you," and you know, they communicate with you, you just accept it because,
Right.
Of course, why wouldn't you? Right.
You believe
they're a loving,
yeah.
loving parent. So.
And we can certainly relate to that, where people say, yes, I don't need to come to this seminar because I don't need the evidence for creation. Creation isn't a stumbling block for my faith.
Right.
And again, that's great. But what do you do with the students in your church and many adults who don't believe the Bible?
Right. You wouldn't want to be rude to somebody and make it too pointed.
No,
but the thing is, when somebody says, well, I don't need this stuff. I don't need to come to this seminar. I don't need to read books on creation. I don't need to watch this show. I don't need to do anything like that because my faith is strong. Well, you know, you got a real I problem there. I. It's all about you, right?
Yeah, it is.
What about somebody else? You know, and I can give my own testimony to say that these issues that Creation Ministries speaks to, I mean, that's why I'm so passionate about the ministry, because these were stumbling blocks to my faith. Right, I'd accepted evolution as fact. That's just science growing up.
Right.
So when people would talk to me about God, I was looking at them like you're loopy. You know, like, I know where I came from, man. I came from pond scum billions of years ago. What do you know? Just go read a science textbook. Like, I was looking at them like they were stupid. I'm not trying to be offensive. that's the way I look at them. I'm just being honest. I was like, don't you watch any kind of TV? Look at all the TV programs in support of evolution. We don't need to explain or have God to explain anything. So, really, you know, there are many people that reject Christ because they're convinced that science disproves the Bible. There are statistics that church leaders know about and have known about for a long time. We'll list some of them here. You know, George Barna, he's kind of like the Christian Gallup poll guy, right?
Yes.
He released a study in 2006 that says 61% of young people from Christian homes who go to public schools lose their faith. Assemblies of God down in the United States, a big denomination, said 66% of their young people were vanishing by 18. Lifeway Research study in 2007 said 70% of young people. And the Southern Baptist Convention in 2002 said 88% of young people were abandoning their faith by the time they reached age 18.
Yeah.
Now look at those numbers rising in such a short period of time. It's absolutely staggering.
Right.
We're hemorrhaging to death as a church.
And none of the survey results are 5% or 8%. They're all well over half.
Oh, it's astronomical. If there was any kind of illness, if the cancer rate was 80% in any town, what would people be doing? They'd be going, what? They'd be moving, they'd be changing their diet, they'd be changing their input, they'd be doing something. But I'm telling you, a Christless eternity in hell is far worse than
getting cancer.
Than anything yet.
And these are American surveys, and their surveys been done in other countries. Here in Canada, a report just came out this year. In fact, I was speaking in Charlottetown, PEI, just a couple of weeks ago, and talking with the pastor there. And in the PAOC church here in Canada, the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, he was saying that that they recently did a survey, and their numbers were 90%. They are losing 90%, 9 out of 10 of their primarily students will leave the church.
Unbelievable.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Josh McDowell recently spoke at my brother-in-law's church in Illinois.
Just a fantastic apologist,
Yes,
Josh
yeah.
McDowell.
A former atheist
Yeah.
who was challenged by Christians when he was in college or he actually wanted to disprove the resurrection.
Right. Yeah.
In order to save his Christian friends at college embarrassment. He was doing them a favor, you see. Well, he became a Christian in the process.
Right.
And he said this at this church here a couple years ago. 63% of young people said they would attend church if the church presented truth in a way that they understood it and it was significant and meaningful to their lives.
Right. So what's he saying? People are looking for the meat.
And there's a solution here.
Yeah. You can have all the hoopla, all the stuff, but people are looking to have an intellectually sound faith.
Absolutely.
More when we come back.
In 2003, the Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded to the pioneers of MRI scanning technology. But of those honoured for this amazing medical breakthrough, there was a glaring omission. Incredibly, the Nobel Committee did not recognise Dr. Raymond Damadian, who is widely known as the man who invented the MRI scanner. The two men who did receive the Nobel Prize certainly contributed to the field, but there's no doubt that Damadian made the pioneering breakthroughs. And what makes his exclusion even more suspect is that up to 3 people can share the award. It does make you wonder if the committee's decision was influenced by the fact that Raymond Damadian is an outspoken Christian creationist. Even atheistic philosophy professor Michael Roos confessed, "I cringe at the thought that Raymond Damadian was refused his just honour because of his religious beliefs."
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Today on Creation Magazine Live, we're talking about how we can use evidences, creation evidences, in evangelism. And when you think about it, the question becomes, well, what role does apologetics actually play when you're leading someone to Christ?
Right. And from a human perspective, we can kind of say, well, we have the experience of certainly you and I can experience that personally, but many people, you investigate Christianity, you look at the evidences that give support to the credibility, the accuracy of the Word of God,
right.
And then people end up becoming Christians. And so you have that kind of from a human perspective.
Right.
But the Bible makes it clear that God saves sinners through the preaching of the gospel,
Right.
not through evidences,
Yep.
not through apologetics. In 1 Corinthians 1:18 it says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing." That's everybody.
Yep.
But to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God. So initially, when we're all in that foolishness, we're all unsaved before we're saved.
Yeah.
It's foolishness, but it becomes the power of God. That's what God uses to save people.
Right.
In Romans 1:16 it says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is," look at this, "it is the power of God for the salvation to everyone who believes."
Right.
It's the gospel, the preaching of the gospel that saves people. So that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
How does apologetics fit in with evangelism?
Yeah. So you could answer that by posing another question, right? What does it actually mean to be saved?
Okay.
And of course, we've got a verse here, 1 Timothy 2:4. It says, "God, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of truth." Becoming a Christian isn't some mystical, emotional experience, right?
Yes.
It's coming to the knowledge of the truth. There are a lot of religions out there with a lot of untestable things. If you want to think that you're, regurgitated 17 times over and over again in some mystical, whatever. I mean, I'm not mocking it. I'm just saying there's all these different beliefs that you cannot verify. And so emotionalism or just something like that, I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying that you don't feel God and feel emotion. I'm just saying that's not the experience. It's the coming to the knowledge of truth, right?
Yeah,
That's
just, well, I feel saved.
I feel saved. Josh McDowell's actually said, if you just say, well, a rotten tomato in my left sneaker, that's what I'm going to put my faith in. Well, that's not going to save you. You can put as much faith as you want in something goofy like that. It's got to be in something true.
Right.
So here's some basic truths that Christians know. God is holy. People are sinners. Jesus died to pay for sins. We can be made holy by accepting God's offer of salvation through Christ's death, and true believers demonstrate their faith by repentance. So,
Right. And ultimately, we're engaged in a truth war.
Exactly.
The creation evolution issue is an issue of where's the truth?
Mm-hmm.
If evolution is true, let's live according to that. But of course, we don't believe that, and there's lots of evidence against that, and that's our topic. How do we convince people? How do we show them that evolution is wrong and they can place their faith in the Bible?
Yep.
And so many people are convinced that, for example, if you leave hydrogen gas sitting around long enough, it becomes people. But that's not truth. We can look at, this gives us a hint here in 2 Corinthians 10:5. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, well, that would be evolution and no God and naturalism and so on, and take every thought captive to obey Christ.
Right.
So what we want to do as Christians is, essentially what we want to do is, as it says in 2 Corinthians 10:5 here, we want to destroy those false ideas, those falsehoods that are holding people's minds captive to a lie. Because if we don't, they will die believing that lie.
Right. And there's a lot of things, that's what our ministry does. It's, we'll do that. We'll say, look at this evidence that evolutionists are using to convince people. Boom, here's why it's wrong. And we do demolish them. And that's why the ministry is very effective, and that's why atheists aren't too excited about us, to be honest, because the average person just wondering about the creation evolution debate, they're not as passionate about it. But if you're a committed atheist, you're running around saying there's no God, you have to believe in evolution.
Yes.
So therefore, any attack on your religion, well, they're going to attack back quite
it's
quite
an
soundly.
emotional response, and just the notion of, so here's where apologetics fits in.
Yeah.
Right? We destroy those false ideas with logic, with reason, with scientific, with observations and so on, fresh dinosaur bones and all the rest of it that we talked about so much on these shows. And that's where apologetics fits in, because we're told to go and take every thought captive and destroy those false ideas.
Exactly.
So that's, in terms of blending these two together, that's where it fits.
So it's like you said, it's a truth war, and Satan doesn't really care what people believe, as
Right.
long as it's not the truth. So that's what our role is, and we're going to talk more about that when we come back.
Richard Van Grad and Calvin Smith also host a fast-paced and informal internet-based video program called Genesis Unleashed. These faith-building teaching videos feature responses to news articles, summaries of articles on creation.com, interviews, and answers to some of the most asked questions about the creation-evolution issue and the most attacked book of the Bible, Genesis. Visit creation.com's media center to view or subscribe to the latest video content.
All right, if you just tuned in, we're talking about the relationship between evidences and evangelism, between apologetics, and how we can use that to lead people to the truth.
Right.
Yes.
And what we just talked about actually gives us clear direction, right? For
does.
how to use creation evidences and apologetics in general is basically you can use these truths to basically tear down any falsehoods in people's lives, any stumbling blocks they had that prevent them to getting the gospel. So that's our role.
Right. Remember, people are saved through the preaching of the gospel. And we run into, I don't know, Cal, I'm sure you've run into folks like this as well. The well-meaning creationists in the church who are creation is their thing.
Right.
That's their it's almost like if they didn't believe in creation, they'd be into government conspiracies and alien cover-ups and stuff like that. But it's if your whole purpose is trying to get people to be creationists and talking about creation evidences, and you never present the gospel, they're never going to get saved.
There's a lot of creationists that are going to go to hell, right?
Yes.
Because the thing is, you start talking about intelligent design, you start showing them the sophistication of design. Look at these molecular motors inside things. Look at these molecular biological robots and all these kind of things. People can go, wow, aliens must have created us, right?
Right,
and
and many do.
And they're just on this wrong track, and it's a false religion. You need to bring people to the truth. So these are great tools, great weapons in the battle for truth, I guess you could say. But you need to point people to the truth, and that's Jesus.
And an important tip is if you're out there and you're on creation.com and you're absorbing some of the information that we're talking about here and through the books and DVDs and so on, that's great. But you need to also be frequently presenting the gospel. Right. Oftentimes, many of the really hard debates that Christians have with atheists or that creationists have with evolutionists, they evaporate. The opponent, the person you're trying to evangelize, becomes a Christian, and suddenly, I don't need evidences that there's a God. I know, and I've heard that happen with a number of people. It's interesting, but we can use tools. CMI provides. See, there's a witnessing booklets that we have. They answer a question, and so you've got, again, apologetics and evangelism. They answer a question: where did Cain get his wife? How did dinosaurs fit with the Bible? That kind of thing. And in the back of those witnessing booklets, they include a basic gospel plan, what you need to know to make Christ Lord of your life.
Right. So it's like it takes care of the stumbling block, and then it's like, by the way, the gospel's true.
Yes.
Takes care of the stumbling block. By the way, the gospel's true. So that's really what you have to have in your head all the time. It's not about winning an argument. It's not about stumping someone. It's not about making someone look foolish. It's not about going, aha, see, your evidence doesn't work, and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, it goes both ways actually in the creation evolution debate, I find. Creation Magazine, what a fantastic tool that CMI's had for over 30 years now.
Yeah.
A magazine for families, for Christian families, so that they can, articles for all levels of the family, even, kids' Genesis Bible studies in there. Everyone can understand the articles. Fantastic tool. I remember Rob Carter, one of our scientists down in the States at CMI. He said Creation Magazine for him in university was like a lifeline. Like it kept his faith strong, because it was almost like, boy, is there anybody else out there that believes the Bible? And, that type of thing. He had an interesting concept, right? How he likes to use resources. You told me one time.
Well,
you guys were together.
He described it. I like this, and he described Creation Magazine as a thought bomb, right? So what happens is if you're talking with somebody about creation and they're evolutionists, or you're just trying to strengthen a Christian, give them the magazine. Say, hey, here, read this magazine.
Right.
Tell me what you think about it.
Yeah.
And then you run away, and he ran across the stage, and then you see the bomb go off. And, what? You mean the Bible's true? You mean there's evidence that God created? And wow, this is incredible. So it's a thought bomb. But we can think about other things. Here's some more tips. The Bible talks about both spiritual things and non-spiritual things. It talks about things like things that science has discovered only recently. It talks about people and events in history. Those are real things that can be investigated. They can be verified. They can be tested.
Right.
The life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Those are actual events. But the spiritual things that the Bible talks about obviously can't be tested. And so this makes it important for Christians to bring in all the evidences, the historical data that supports those things that can be tested, to give credence, to give support to the things that we can't test.
Right.
And there's another sort of important tip that we can consider.
Exactly. There are mountains of evidence for the accuracy of the Bible. I mean, our website talks about it. So really, you can have a strong intellectual faith, and that's really what our ministry is about. We'll be back in a moment.
Every time I hear of Neanderthal man, I can't help but feel sorry for the poor guy. Initially reconstructed to look like some apish brute, it took 44 years before a reanalysis of the fossils revealed that Neanderthal man's anatomy was very similar to yours and mine. Neanderthals buried their dead, which isn't the sort of behaviour you'd expect from an animal. What's more, discovery of ornaments, tools and stone-tipped spears reveal a high level of sophistication. Neanderthals made their own superglue from pitch, and flute-like structures found with their remains suggest they enjoyed music. But what did Neanderthal man really look like? In recent years, researchers have answered this question by using computerized reconstructions, commonly used in forensic science. These studies show that Neanderthal man looked remarkably similar to you and I. If he was dressed in a suit and walked past you in the street, you probably wouldn't notice him.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, so we've been talking about evangelism, and if you broaden this topic and you use the word missions, of course, there's something that usually pops into people's heads, right?
Yes.
They're thinking of going to a distant country, at least a country that's not yours, and presenting the gospel, right? Sharing, etc. So evangelism. So
to get the full picture of evangelism, missions organizations have developed what they call the E-scale.
Right.
And this can kind of broaden our minds and give us a feel for all the different levels, if you like, of evangelism. Evangelism, the big picture. E0 is evangelism among churchgoers, among children of Christian parents. There's no cultural barriers that are crossed. It's the same culture, the same language. That's the E0 level.
Right.
E1, evangelism to non-Christians in the same culture.
Right.
And that would include things like
your unsaved family and friends, or
yes. Yeah, street preaching in your own town, handing out tracts, that kind of thing. It's that level of evangelism. E2, evangelism to non-Christians in a slightly different culture. That would be if a Canadian went to the UK or went to Australia, same language,
right?
But the culture's not the same. They might be understanding things in a different way.
You've been to Australia, right?
I have, yeah.
Do they speak the same language? Just joking. I've
Careful
been there
now.
too.
But E3. Let's move on quickly. The E3. This is evangelism to non-Christians in a very different culture. That would be like a Canadian or an American going to Tanzania or going to.
You've got to learn a different language. You don't understand the culture. Yeah,
very different culture, different language. They understand things differently, a very different way. So that gives us a picture of evangelism in its entirety.
Right. Now that scale gives us a good understanding, of how we're going to share the gospel. But what's interesting is that this E0 level, if that's not done, nothing else is going to get done, right?
Right.
I mean, we showed you some pretty scary figures here. 70, 80%, 90% in certain denominations of our young people abandoning the faith. Guess what? E0 evangelism is horrific in Western world countries.
It's one of the most critical needs today.
It's one of the most important things, because you're never going to train up strong. I mean, think of an evangelist that goes to a different country, willing to learn a different language, risk their lives sometimes, etc. You're not going to get people like that unless they're strong Christians. Well, where are those strong Christians coming from? And if we're losing 70, 80% of our kids, then level 0 evangelism is we're failing miserably. That's about the only thing you can say.
Yes.
I'm not being
Ultimately,
hard.
all evangelism at every one of those levels is going to fail if we don't have healthy churches.
Right.
Churches that are equipping people to understand the truth and accuracy of the Bible.
Right. And I mean, that's what CMI is all about, right? We partner with churches, church leaders, to help their congregations, to help pastors so they'll have answers. Really, we want to equip people that equip people that equip people. That's our goal, right? We don't want to come in and
multiply those efforts.
And blah, blah, blah. We want to pass that information on. We've got resources for kids. We've got resources for students. We've got resources for parents. We've got resources for grandparents. So there's no reason for a Christian in our culture not to get that information. Well, hopefully, at least if they've heard of us.
Right, yes. And of course, there's creation.com, which has thousands upon thousands of articles and all kinds of videos. Some of you may be watching these shows online on creation.com.
Yep.
But you mentioned grandparents.
Yep.
We've got resources. Have a look at these Please Nana books here, this series. And these were written by a grandmother specifically for grandparents, for grandmas, to read to their grandkids.
Right.
To teach them truths about, what is death? And it seems like it's a big topic. Well, what is death? How do you, if a little bird dies in the backyard and little Susie's all distraught at 3 years old, oh, this poor bird. You can use those resources to grow your grandkids and so on. So we've got those wonderful resources. Some of our children's books and so on. The Please Nana books, we've already talked about those. In Malachi 2:15, it says this: Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. Right. So one of the purposes of marriage is to produce not just offspring, but godly offspring. Exactly. And you can do that through some of these resources.
So if you want to tell people about Jesus, start at home. That's an important message.
Right.
Many Christians today have a diminished view of the Bible because they can't answer questions like, is there really a God? What about evolution? Are there facts to back up the Bible? Or is it all just faith? Creation Ministries expert speakers visit churches all over the world to help pastors equip their congregations to understand that the whole Bible, even Genesis, is accurate. We help to demolish the arguments that the world uses to try to convince people that the Bible isn't true. For more information on getting a CMI speaker to visit your church, contact your nearest CMI office through our website.
Okay, we're talking about things that are happening in the news.
Right.
Well, one of the things that happened recently was Bill Nye the Science Guy, and that's a name that may be familiar to a lot of you.
Right.
He had these great science shows for kids in the 90s, and great shows, wonderful stuff. And he did a YouTube video in 2012 where he basically just slammed creationists.
Right.
And he encouraged parents, don't teach your kids creationism, because then we're going to, because we need engineers and we need all kinds of. We did a response. That wasn't really a response. We did a more of a parody of his video.
Actually, you did a parody and it was really good.
We had fun doing that.
Love the bow tie. It was good.
But I got a bow tie. But He mentioned in his video, you can find it on YouTube, of course. He mentions plate tectonics. He mentions biology. He mentions we have ancient dinosaur bones. He mentions radioactivity.
Yeah.
And you go through his video, and he just doesn't have a clue. It's like he believes that creationists we check our brains, and we don't see any of these things.
Right.
And it's like he's thinking it's an education issue.
Right. And at least that's the way it's come across. Because I would say someone like Bill Nye, he probably has checked around a couple of creation websites and knows there's PhD scientists and stuff like that. But really, yeah, that's the way he comes across. And that's the way I think a lot of lay public think. That if we could just study evolution, if you and I mean, we're just creationists, right? So, I mean, we're just hicks. Right. So if we just went to school, studied evolution, looked at the information in textbooks, well, voila, we just give up faith in Christ and we'd accept evolution, and we just know that that's the way, it is.
Right, and that's one of the ironies, because
I grew up on the other side of the fence, looked at some information.
Have, right? Yeah. And we in fact, we have an information department that we subscribe to the evolutionary publications that are out there to stay in touch with what evolutionists are putting out today to attempt to shore up belief and any observations that they're interpreting, so that we can understand it properly. We know a great deal about evolution.
That's right.
And it's
unfortunate that I would say the majority of people that I interact with that are not creationists have a very poor view or poor understanding that most creationists really do know what they're talking about. People that have been involved in this area in research, in presenting. You go to creation.com, you're not going to see a lot of, there's some hardcore science there, some brilliant people that work with our ministry, etc.
And it's because we study evolution and the science supposedly in favor of it, that we're not evolutionists. That's part of it. The Bible also plays a role. Obviously, if you're Christians, you don't believe in evolution.
Of course.
But
there were scientists on staff with us now that were scientists, became Christians and believed in evolution. As a matter of fact, David Catchpool over in Australia says how he went to a meeting with these creationists. Now, he's a Christian, so he's looking at these creationists. He knows they're Christians, but he's saying these guys are totally, this is wrong. He's going to go straighten them out and let them know, what it really was like. Got exposed to the other interpretations of what he'd seen as interpreted as evolution. Boom, now he speaks for the ministry. Very passionate about it. So
and Bill Nye just doesn't have a clue about the relationship between faith and science. No, we did a whole show on this, creation.com/CML2-08.
Right.
And there's a lot more details on this whole topic on creation.com. Have a look at creation.com. We'll see you next week.